Bruce Arena is someone who undoubtedly needs no introduction. He's a member of the National Soccer Hall of Fame. He's had a long and distinguished coaching career and is the most successful coach in the history of United States soccer. He was head coach of the U.S. men's national team at the 1996 Summer Olympics, the 2002 FIFA World Cup, and the 2006 FIFA World Cup. He is the winner of 5 MLS Cup championships as head coach of the New York Red Bulls, DC United, and LA Galaxy in Major League Soccer. And he also has won 5 NCAA championships as the head coach at University of Virginia. He most recently coached the U.S. men's national team between 2016 and 2017, and he is the U.S. national team's longest-serving head coach. And despite what the title of the book says, this is more than just a critical analysis of the faults of U.S. Soccer development. It is a memoir of his many, many years working at all levels of the game and growing the game to the point it's at now where, whether we're playing in the World Cup or not, there is tremendous enthusiasm for the sport across the U.S., and it's not just every 4 years, it's year-round, 24/7. Soccer really is becoming an American game. So with all that said, I'd like to thank Bruce for all his years growing the game here in the U.S., and I'd like to welcome him to Politics and Prose at the Wharf. Thank you all so much for coming.
I agreed to write in the early part of 2017, and originally the book was going to end a little differently than the book we have today. The book is really an autobiography. It's really about my background, and I was telling Justin before the event tonight that I don't know the publishing industry, but they were really excited about having a title that could grab you, and I guess that's what it was. It's What's Wrong with Us, but it's the book's really an autobiography, and it talks about my different coaching experiences with the different players I've been with, and at the end we discuss some issues with the sport in our country. I also go through obviously the qualifying campaign in 2017. I started with the U.S. team this last time around at the end of November, I think about November 30th of 2016. So I had 2017 to try to qualify the team for the World Cup. And, you know, we were down a little bit. We lost our first 2 games in the Hex, which is a total of 10 games. And we had really good moments in 2017 and failed at the end. You know, we went 14 games without losing our first 14 games in 2017. And, you know, we knew when we started, told the team that we had no margin for error the whole time. And probably the most difficult moment for us was our games in March when we first started playing the Hex again, because anytime we lost, we might have been eliminated already from the Hex. So the players held up very well for the most part. We won the Gold Cup in 2017. We got into September and lost an important game at home to Costa Rica. And then at the end, we beat Panama at home and had to go to Trinidad and get a point. And we knew that exactly, and we failed on the day. And that's the way it is. You know, there's a lot of people have their theories on everything, and what I'd simply say, we failed on the day. We didn't play well. If you coach long enough, if you've watched this World Cup, who knows what's going to happen? Surprises come all the time. If you had asked me a month ago who was going to be in the final of the World Cup, I would have said Germany. I look pretty stupid today, don't I? So we don't know. The sport of soccer is a low-scoring sport, so your margin for error is very slim. And there are more upsets in the sport of soccer, and we've seen it this time around in the World Cup, which has probably been supported greatly with VAR, which helps in some of the decisions. So there's been a lot of penalty kicks rewarded, and games have changed. But the sport's challenging at every level. And one thing I point out in the book, and I think we've made this mistake in our soccer culture. We've believed that we should be in a World Cup every 4 years, that you don't grind it out like everyone else does around the world, and we're just supposed to be in there. The world's changed. So the second smallest country ever in the history of the World Cup is now in a final on Sunday, Croatia. If I'm not mistaken, I thought I heard they said the population of Croatia is 1.4 million people. Is that correct? 3 or 4 million. I live in Los Angeles, so could fit Croatia very easily in Los Angeles then. And so one of the things I talk about in the books is we always talk about soccer as a game of opposites, right? Well, here's an opposite. Big doesn't mean you're successful. If being large means you're successful in sports, the World Cup final should be between China, India, United States, and Russia. Something like that. I don't know exactly, but so that doesn't hold water at all. And one of the problems we have in our country is our size. We're too big, in my view. We have different time zones. We have different climates. We have different cultures in different parts of the country, and it makes it very challenging to try to have a national team program or a style of play in our country. Because our country, you can fit, imagine, well, Germany. Where would Germany fit in geographically in our country? New England? I've driven north, south, east, west in Holland, and I think you can do it in 4 or 5 hours driving. So it's completely different, and that is a challenge. That's one of the challenges we have. But anyway, in the book, I start the book talking about, in the introduction, about the disappointment we have and things that lie ahead and some things to think about. And then I discuss my career and how I started in coaching and how I was influenced by people when I was very young that got me into coaching. And I believe the United States has the best environment to be a coach than anywhere in the world, because coaching is teaching, and we not only have the opportunity to see now in our country professional and amateur soccer at all different levels, and we get a lot of exposure. The sport now, when I grew up, the wide world, there's only a few people in here that know this as I look around. We used to have a show called Wide World of Sports. And every 4 years, they show the World Cup final. That was the extent of soccer in the United States in the late 60s, early 70s. Today, you could sit home and watch soccer all day. And the sport is growing tremendously. But my influence is early, and now it's still, and a lot of coaches in our country believe that as well. We can learn from coaches in football, basketball, baseball, hockey, etc. And a lot of the tactics are similar. Working with the athletes, as you go up at higher levels, it goes from teaching skill to psychological. We always talk about in sports, there's 4 components. There's technical, tactical, physical, and psychological. When you get to the professional level where they're pretty much done where they're going to be physically, pretty much done where they're going to be technically, tactically they can grow, but psychologically it's huge. So when you look at these great players on television playing in the World Cup and for the big club teams around the world, you should see what they're like away from the field. And it's a challenge for anybody. And that's what managing and coaching is really challenging at that level. At other levels, with the young kids, obviously, it's about technique and getting the kids to enjoy the game, and hopefully they'll grow and have confidence and want to continue. But at the higher levels you go up, it's really dealing with these athletes. So today you see in our American sports the phenomena in the NBA this year. We're talking about LeBron James or Golden State or the Houston team and the personalities there. It's the same thing we have in coaching national teams or teams in Major League Soccer, and it's a big part of coaching. It's a real big part of coaching. I talk about some of the different personalities I dealt with in my career. I'd probably, the 3 guys I highlight probably the most in the book would be David Beckham, Landon Donovan, and Robbie Keane. And I would say that they are all different, right? If you, even looking from a distance, they're all 3 different individuals. However, at the end of the day, those guys like to compete. I mean, David Beckham, 15 years ago, he could have stopped playing soccer. He didn't need to play soccer. That guy gets on the field. It's all business every day in training, games. Remarkable how competitive he was. Grew up, obviously, in a great club system at Manchester United and just had a mentality about himself. Despite all the other you could say distractions around him possibly, whether it was fashion and other things that was constantly around him. He was all business when he showed up for work every day. And it gets contagious inside a team. So leadership's really critical. So a big job of a coach is not only you're the leader, but you instill leadership qualities in your players. And when your top players inherit those characteristics, you have a chance to be successful. So I talk about that in the book. Probably don't talk about any X's and O's. We laugh as coaches, you know, we know fans like to do that. They're always talking about, you know, you should be playing 4 in the back or 3 in the back. We think we should play 11 players. And if they play as a team, we're okay. We don't get absorbed in the tactics the way the media does, the fans do, through your different social media mechanisms. We talk about being a team and playing for each other. And so if you see in any kind of game, whatever your formation is you start on the day, it's a starting point. That's all it is. It's not an ending point. But if you develop a team the right way, they evolve, and you don't get all hung up on tactics as much as you get hung up on your responsibility as a player on the field and the position you play into your teammates, and you become a team. And we don't get real hung up on those type of things. And the characteristics you have as people will help build a team. So you're seeing in a World Cup today, I think the Croatia team it's all about good players and a great mentality. I mean, very talented midfield players. And I think if they weren't right psychologically, and they got a little bit of a chip on their shoulders, you know, and I think it's carried them a long way. France, on the other hand, is probably a team with a lot of talent and a little bit more, not that they don't have all those other characteristics you need, but I think on Sunday it's probably, well, I'll be dumb enough to say, I picked Germany before the World Cup, so I'll be dumb enough to say France on Sunday, and Croatia might win running away, all I know. It shows what we know. But the sport's interesting. It's different than other sports. If you're playing in the NBA and you're playing on the Golden State Warriors, you can give them a good game. At the end of the day, there's a lot of points being scored. And they're over 48 minutes, they're going to beat you. In soccer, it can be different. So Croatia's had some outstanding play in the goal, got some good defenders, great midfield, and you never know, they could pull it off. If they have any legs left by Sunday, they've been in three straight overtime games. So they're a little bit spent, so that'll be interesting. So some of the things, again, I talk about is my evolution as a coach. And as a young man, I grew up in the New York area, Long Island specifically. And when I grew up, there wasn't youth soccer. And the only organized youth sports I can even recall really was baseball. I played a lot of baseball, played a lot of lacrosse, which my brothers played, and my brothers are the quarterbacks of the football team in high school. And we were all 4 years apart. And my brother Paul graduated, my brother Mike replaced him, and then when Mike graduated, I was supposed to replace Mike. My problem was, in ninth grade, I was 5'3", 110 pounds, the quarterback on the freshman team. And my left tackle, as I say in the book, was literally, he was 6'9", 320 pounds. And I'm trying to throw a pass around him. I stopped playing football. So things happen, and you know, today it's not like that anymore. And probably a little bit of a flaw in our system that kids play one sport. We're finding now that you see some of the great athletes today, they've played a bunch of sports, and I always think that's a plus. And but anyway, so I grew up in Long Island and was wrestling and playing lacrosse in high school. By my junior year. My senior year, one of my better friends got me involved in the soccer team, and I started playing. And that's what got me into the sport of soccer. Went on to college, played somewhat professionally, and had all these experiences. But every step of the way I was touched by a coach. And they were all outstanding as I look back even today. And they influenced me to get into coaching. So I remember when I was at Cornell, going to school. My major was agricultural economics and business management. And I used to say every day, I was playing soccer and lacrosse at Cornell. And I was done with school by 12 o'clock every day, and I said, "There's no way I'm working on Wall Street." And I knew I wanted to play and coach, and that was always my dream. And it was because of the people that influenced me and the coaches. So I went through everything, like we all do academically, but I always knew that one day I would coach. I played professionally in both sports, but I was in an era where those sports weren't that big in the United States. I was drafted by the Cosmos. My senior year at Cornell, I was a captain of the lacrosse team, and I was offered a contract by the Cosmos for $200 a game, and I could also work at JFK for KLM at the desk. And I said, I'm going to probably stick it out and graduate from Cornell, and we'll see what happens after that. It wasn't that inspiring. 2 years later, they signed this guy by the name of Pelisses, or whatever his name was, and things changed. So, timing's everything, I guess. So I played professional lacrosse in Montreal, and my team folded. The league folded, the National Lacrosse League then. Then the next year, I went and played professional soccer in Tacoma, Washington, in the American Soccer League, where my Cornell coach went on and took that job, and our team folded. And then I was offered a position in Hawaii to play for the new Hawaii team in the NASL, and I said to my wife, not going through that again. We would have moved to Hawaii, and they folded the next year anyway. So I would have ended up in Hawaii, though. It wouldn't have been the worst thing, I guess. So I came back, and I started working on an MBA, and again said, there's no way I'm wearing a suit and working on Wall Street. And I got back into coaching at Cornell, and one of my experiences in 1973, after I graduated the spring of '73 at Cornell, and I stayed in Ithaca, '73, '74, and I ended up teaching school and coaching a freshman lacrosse team at Cornell. And one of my players went on to the University of Virginia law school. And when he was there, he called me and he said they're looking for a head soccer coach and assistant lacrosse coach at UVA, but they want to win a national championship in lacrosse. And he said, I couldn't think of anyone else that did both sports than you. And at the time, there were about 3 of us in the country. I went down there for an interview, a young punk at about 26 years old, with long hair, going to Charlottesville, Virginia, where the Mason-Dixon line at the time was, you went south of Baltimore, you went to south. And I was a fish out of water. They looked at me like, But I said to my wife, I got offered the job, and I said, we'll hang in there for a year, see what it's like. I stayed for 18 years. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life. Great school, great people, all of that. But when I was at UVA, I go back to what I said earlier. I'm at the University of Virginia at the time where ACC basketball is so big. And I got to share experiences on the grounds with George Welsh, the football coach, Terry Holland, the basketball coach. In my 3rd or 4th year at Virginia, they moved my office. I was sharing with the lacrosse coach. They moved me downstairs into, they split the visiting team basketball locker room in half. They threw up a frame, sheetrock, a false ceiling, and that was my office, one half of it. The other half was still the visiting team locker room in basketball. I'd be sitting in my office listening to Lefty Drizel, Dean Smith, Mike Krzyzewski, Bobby Cremens, Denny Crum, Digger Phelps, all the top coaches in the country at the time. And at the time, ACC basketball was as big as any sport in this country. And I'm listening to Dean Smith prepare his team. I'm listening to Jim Valvano. It was an unbelievable experience, and I grew as a coach. And you kind of see, so before the game, Gino Auriemma, who's the women's coach at UConn now in women's basketball, the winningest coach in the history of college sports, was the assistant women's coach. He'd come in my office and we'd be listening. Bob Bradley, who's now the coach at LAFC, former national team coach, Coach Egypt. We'd sit in my office and we'd listen to these coaches prepare their teams. We'd rush, we'd go in the office at halftime, listen to them, yell at them a little bit. when the teams went out to warm up, we'd listen to Valvano cracking jokes to his staff, and it was great. I mean, but that's the real thing. You can't get any better experience than that, and that taught me a lot. And then you'd get some ideas, and you'd work with your team. But the big thing I learned out of is communicate. Is communicate, and it was a blast. So that was an important part of my coaching career. And then after, and I had some, when I was coaching at UVA, we didn't have professional soccer in this country. The NASL had folded, so basically there was the A-League, I think, but basically our top players went to college then. So I had at the University of Virginia, John Hawkes, Tony Meola, Claudio Reyna, some great players. And then the professional league came back in '96, and I took the job here at DC United. And that started again. That was a whole new experience. First time I had a lot of exposure working with international players and then understanding those things. I had coached the Olympic team that year, which was another good experience. But you see today in a lot of sports, you see it in Major League Soccer today, young coaches get jobs. They were good players, they make them a coach. Coaching is a very hard profession. It's a real skill. And you need a lot of time and work. You need to experiment. And you got to make a lot of mistakes. And if you're in a high-profile position early and you make those mistakes, you get fired and you never get a job again. So it's a bit of a mistake today. I think every coach, like a player, you got to start at a certain level. You got to bide your time and get there. I remember for years when I was at the LA Galaxy, we'd play Real Madrid in preseason games, and Zidane was coaching. He was the assistant coach there. He went to the B team. He worked 4 or 5 years and learned his craft. And then he ends up winning 3 consecutive championships in the UCL. So he's been outstanding. But he put his time in. He didn't step off the field and become a coach. So I talk about these experiences in the book with the different teams, the different players, and the interactions, and went into some detail about our games last year and trying to build a team. A national team is very challenging because if you're not involved in a 4-year cycle, it's really hard to build your team because it takes a little time understanding the players. So we didn't have that, and basically what I did is I used the players that were there. And for the most part, those were the best players that we had. But building a team and trying to change them from the previous 2 years was very challenging. And for the most part, they were an outstanding group. I would say this, and I don't know, you can tell me if this is a fault. I've never been on social media. I've never been on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. So, I don't listen to all the talk. But I do know I do go on the internet. I'm not that backward. I'm not living in a cave. And I see and hear some of the reactions and some of the criticism of the team last year that they were bad people, players, and that's completely false. In all my years of coaching, I probably coached about 40 years. They were as good a group of people to work with. They really busted their tail, and they knew in 2017 it was really challenging. We were behind the 8 ball, and they gave everything they could for the U.S. And at the end, they fell short. And I'll be honest with you, you get a break, ball bounces a little different, maybe we win the World Cup, But we did fail, and you got to live with that. I mean, you can't hide from that. However, some of the criticism was way over the top. However, that's what we sign up for. We also know that that's all part of it, and you live with it. Could be worse. I could be working on Wall Street. And as I've always said, I've never had a job, so I have no regrets about any of that stuff. So, am I on a schedule here properly? I can start asking for some questions. Okay, I've talked a lot, going up and down all over the place. So now this is your time, and feel free to ask whatever you'd like. Yes, sir. Okay, just as a starting point to let you know, I don't pick the venues where we played these games. There was only one venue I picked in 2017. Our first game in the Hex in March against Honduras. U.S. Soccer scheduled a game in Salt Lake City. We were 0-2 in the Hex, and I said, "Are you crazy? We have to win that game. We're going to go to altitude and play. We're going to travel players from Europe and put them in altitude and try to beat Honduras." And I said, "We can't do it." And they said, "Well, we're down the road." I said, "That's the one we have to change." We went to San Jose. So your question about Chattanooga, by the way, I didn't pick Chattanooga to play an exhibition game. Promotion and relegation, I don't go into detail in the book on this stuff, but I mentioned at the end, it's on my checklist. I think they should have promotion and relegation in Divisions 2 and 3. And it would work this way. If you're in Division 2 and you finish in the top 3, you don't get promoted to MLS. You just get a nice slap on the back. If you're in the bottom 3, you go down, and the third division team comes up. And then you set a timeline and you tell Major League Soccer, in 10 years or 15 years, we're going full promotion relegation. I say to do it that way now is because we wouldn't have Major League Soccer if you told these owners, build stadiums, do this and that, and then next year you might be playing against Chattanooga. That's not the American mentality. However, if you say 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, this is what we're going to do, I think it can work. And promotion relegation, I think, is important for our younger players. The second, third division isn't tough enough, isn't demanding enough for those players. So we have very good players at the age of 17, and they don't go anywhere between 17 and 21. And it has to be a more difficult environment, a more challenging environment, and that's one of the ways I think you could do it. And I would propose this, again, if Christian Pelisses had stayed in the United States, where would he be today? I would not be surprised if he wasn't playing a whole lot in Major League Soccer. So we have to come up with a better scheme for our young players. And I go into this a lot at the end of the book, is that I think that U.S. Soccer, being the governing body in the sport in the country, has to mandate that X number of U.S. passport holders are on the field or are in the 18-man game day roster. And I'm not saying you give them positions on the field, but they do that everywhere. I give examples in the book how Mexico has done that, how England did it. England has put a lot of emphasis in the last 4 years on their academy programs. And this is what England's done in the last 3 or 4 years. They won the U17 World Championships, the U20 World Championships, now lost in the semifinals of the World Cup, and their goal is to win the 2022 World Cup. So they have a plan. Now their plan is going to be different than ours because they're a different country, and as I said, we're unique, and you got to come up with your own plan. But we do not have the leadership where they come up with a plan and they're demanding. U.S. Soccer is the governing body. They can tell MLS, we will not sanction your league unless you do this. And they can do that. They do it in Scandinavian countries, Scotland. On game day rosters, they require a certain number of homegrown players to be on the roster. So you can do things that encourage the development of young players. We're not doing enough of that.
Thank you. I'm from the Netherlands, and almost everywhere in the world it's the #1 sport. So I'm wondering, for the future, can soccer become one of the most popular sports in America?
Yes, but it doesn't have to be the most popular sport. I mean, we have all these sports and they're all very popular. The sport of soccer has grown tremendously. And I think it'll continue to grow. In another 20 years, our league will be one of the top leagues in the world. And the problems we have are a lot different in Holland. What's the competition in Holland? Yeah. So, we have a lot of competition in our sport. So it's going to take time, but it's made unbelievable progress. I'll go back to this, and a lot of people in this room don't understand this. Growing up in New York as a young kid, I had the New York Giants. I followed in the NFL. Their games were blacked out because they couldn't sell out. The New York Knicks couldn't sell out Madison Square Garden. The Yankees, the same thing. The Rangers in hockey. So on game day, I used to walk, well, not walk, but I used to go see the New York Knicks play, go to old Madison Square Garden and get a ticket and go to the game. And that would never happen today. Those sports at the time were probably 50 years in existence. MLS is 20 years old today. MLS has grown much greater in 20 years than the NBA, the NFL, baseball, hockey, but no one's patient about it. They think we're just going to start a professional league and all of a sudden it's the best one in the world. You know, we're doing actually pretty well. So give it another 20 years. We'll meet everyone here in 20 years when the book is going to be What's Wrong with You then. And we'll talk about it. But I think in another 20 years, this sport's going to be very popular, and baseball and basketball will still be around. I'm not sure about the NFL.
American youth soccer has been under a lot of criticism of being a middle-class sport, where many children with talents can't afford some of the more competitive leagues. What kind of a plan can America come up with to counteract this criticism so that more kids can participate?
I'm trying to be as delicate as possible in this answer. Every sport in our country is a pay-for-play. Every sport. It's not just soccer. You have kids in a basketball league, a baseball league. Aren't they paying to play? Yes, they are. Baseball and soccer and basketball, the AAU and basketball, hockey. It costs a fortune for kids to play hockey. So I spent 8 or 9 years with the LA Galaxy, right, recently. We have an academy program there where we educate the kids that are in high school. Like, they come to our building and get the high school education. It's free. Everything they do is free. I mean, they're the elite kids in the Los Angeles area, certainly. But any kid that has talent that I know of around the country and can't afford to play, it gets covered somehow. I mean, I have not been able to distinguish between why we don't have better players based on the fact it's too expensive to play. I think every kid that has a talent anywhere in our country will get taken care of. And I could be, and listen, here's the other part of it. There are millions of kids that play soccer. You think U.S. soccer could pay for millions of kids to play soccer at the youth level? It's impossible. You know what that would cost? Try to figure that out. With the millions of kids play youth soccer, you can't pay for all of them. Somebody has to pay for it, and a lot of it's recreational, and it's a big difference. So you see, there's about 100 academy programs in the country. It's still not enough for the U.S., but all the elite players, boys and girls now as well. It's both. The elite players in those areas, for the most part, a lot of their expenses are covered. I don't know if that's the right answer to the question.
Hi, Coach. With 14 years in hindsight, did U.S. soccer fail Freddie Adu, or was Freddie Adu just not that good? Or better rephrase, did Freddie Adu fail U.S. soccer under Chief?
You know, in every sport, there are young kids that come that have a reputation that fail. If you have a good system, a lot of kids are going to fail because it's competitive. Freddie's a nice person, and he wasn't good enough. I think there was too much hype for him.
You think at 14 it was too early for him to be on the professional
we have guys that are 30 years old and they're still too young to be on a professional field. 14 years old? Wow. That was crazy. I did a thing on 60 Minutes at the time, and I said that I think the hype is crazy for him. Put a lot of pressure on him too.
With the World Cup coming to North America in 2026, what does U.S. soccer need to really do right to make a lasting cultural change for soccer in the United States?
What do you mean by a lasting cultural change?
To grow a much larger impact. I think a lot of people talk about how the opportunity is going to do a lot for American soccer, but I also see it as an opportunity, that it could turn into a missed opportunity almost.
I think it'll be a great opportunity. The World Cup is going to have 48 teams then, which is bad. There's going to be a lot of ugly games in group play. And even though they say they never fix draws, somehow Russia got Saudi Arabia and Egypt in their first 2 games this year. So hopefully when they pick out that cold ball out of the pot for the U.S., they get the right teams, and the U.S. advances, and Mexico and Canada out of group play. But I just think it's a plus. I mean, this country is absolutely an outstanding venue for a World Cup. It'll be terrific. And you know how everyone gets around the event, and you know how the demographics are in this country. The support for the World Cup in 2026 is going to be overwhelming. And that's another 8 years for the league to grow, for our sport to grow in the country. We'll be better prepared for it. 1994 brought Major League Soccer here, so that had a big impact, and I think this is going to have a big impact as well.
I have a question about the national team. I know that Ernie Stewart has been named general manager, and I guess he'll have a lot to say about who the next coach is. I wanted to ask about that relationship. Like, the impression I get about, especially about like the European teams, is that the manager of the national team is pretty much a dictator. And as long as he's winning enough games, he makes all the decisions. Like, how will that work? How will Ernie Stewart and the new coach
I don't think that's
choose players?
I don't think that's true. I think look at Spain. They fired that dictator pretty quick. I think in the more developed countries in the sport that the federation controls the national team program. Not that the coach isn't very influential. I write in the book that when we lost to Trinidad flying back, I was with the now president of U.S. Soccer, Carlos Cordero, and I said to him at the time, from being in this program for 11 months now, there's a lot of issues, and I think you should have a general manager. And he put that in his platform when he ran, and then I suggested what his responsibilities were. Now, Ernie's been quoted, now I don't know if it's accurate, that he would select the players and the style of play. That's a dictator. I don't think that's the right way to approach it. Hopefully he's there to support the national team coach. He's the in-between with the federation, in the national team, with the league, those kind of things. If he's going to pick the players and dictate the style of play, he might as well coach the team as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that whole thing works, and I think he will have a lot of influence on picking a new coach. The leadership in our country probably doesn't have enough of a background on how to select a coach.
But I mean, if you were the new coach, how would you react to a general manager who says, I'm going to select the players and have a say about tactics and stuff?
I would say I'd probably see you later. I mean, at the end of the day, somebody's head's got to roll, and it's always the coach, isn't it? So whose head's going to roll in that situation?
One of the players that I really admired growing up, not only as a player but as a captain as well, was Michael Bradley. I thought he was great, not only as a leader on the pitch, but off. And I was just wondering if you could share like some anecdotes or what it was like working with a leader like him.
Well, Michael's dad and I are good friends. You know, he started his coaching career as my assistant at the University of Virginia and then at DC United. And so Bob and Lindsay actually were my son's first babysitter. So we have close ties, I guess you'd say, right? Michael's a lot like his father. And he's very focused. He's driven. In this day and age, it's not that cool for some players to have that kind of leader. For a coach, it's great to have a captain that's that kind of person because he's got the right focus, the right mentality. Players today are all over the place. You know, the phone and the Twitter account is more important than anything else. So I think Michael is a throwback to players many years ago, and I think it's good. And I think today sometimes there's clashes because of that, but I thought he was a fantastic leader. He's not the best player in the world, but he's certainly not the worst. And the thing I like about Michael is you know what you're getting. It's pretty level. And we have too many players like this. And I'd rather have that.
Bruce, I'm looking forward to the book, and congratulations on a great career. And I'm a little younger than you, but I can remember Soccer Made in Germany on PBS was the one thing that we watched on TV. So I used to watch that with my dad, and you're right, we have come a long way. Quick question for you. The 2002 World Cup team, that was some of the most fun I've ever had watching soccer. I remember getting up in the middle of the night. We were living in Indianapolis and watching those games, and it was just so much fun. And even when you guys lost to Germany, as an American, I was extremely proud of the way you guys played. And I thought, wow, the soccer is, it's going to be, I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I thought we were going to continue to get better from that. It seems like we've stalled. And one thing that jumped out at me during that time is that we failed to qualify for 2 Olympics. And that's a generation of players younger players who didn't get to play on an international stage with some pressure, with some responsibility. And I really, personally, as an outsider, I thought that really hurt the national team's development. 1, do you agree with that? And 2, do you kind of agree that since 2002, we, for lack of a better term, kind of treaded water?
Well, I agree that missing out on the Olympics hurts. It's not the end of the world, but it hurts. We have gotten better. Everyone else has gotten better as well. And some have gotten a lot better. We have many more competent players today than ever before, but we still don't have a bunch of elite players. We have, so this last team, we have and I always use this expression, people think when you're coaching a team and putting teams together, it's so sophisticated and you have all these complex tactics and other things. But end of the day, we always saw somebody's got to make a play. You always see that and also make a play. That kind of guys can make plays. We had Christian Pelisses that could make plays. We didn't have some players in the end that could make a few plays that made a difference in the game. So you see, even the elite teams that are very talented, on a bad day, there's a guy that can step up and make a bunch of players that can make a few plays. We generally had one player, and we needed more. If I go back to the 2002 World Cup, I use this in the book. I compare the teams. And we had a bunch of guys that could make plays, but also they had a great chemistry. Competitive guys could care less what their roles were. The most important thing was the team. And they did everything. I would change formations from one game to the next, not even have to explain it to them because they could care less. The reason and everyone thought it was some of the greatest things. I went from a back 4 to a back 3 when we played Mexico and thought it was phenomenal. Well, one of the reasons we did is Frankie Haydick got suspended and we didn't have another left back. So we only had 3 backs, so it was not like I was a genius figuring that out. And everyone's saying what a genius move it was. we always say we're going to put 11 players on the field and one of them is going to be a goalkeeper. So we always tell the teams, no, we're going to play with a goalkeeper. After that, we'll figure it out. Well, the failure is that we're not moving more kids. That we have more talented kids at 16, 17 than we have ever had before. And we don't have the right environment to really get them over the top. Whether it's through the academy programs, the reserve team programs, the Major League Soccer. We can't always say just send them to Europe, because then they don't make it in Europe either. We have got to develop our own players in this country as well. And maybe we develop them where we become a selling league and then you sell them. That's still good. But we've got to develop our own players here. We've got to find the right environment to get it done.
Coach, first of all, thanks. I mean, you've really made a huge impact on your sport. And for those of us who've been in D.C. for a long time, remember the United days of the 90s. It just was a lot of fun. You were bringing people into those stadiums that had never been together before, and Latin janitors. And
I always told David Beckham that Marco Echeverry hits a better ball over distance than he does it. He was not happy about that.
We loved it, and it's been great to watch you since, and of course then learn then about what you've done in Virginia. Question for you too, really. One is fitness. Can soccer learn? Some of us have coached triathletes and runners, and there's been a lot of really great fitness developments in those sports and some of the other endurance sports. And after all, soccer is a running sport. Can we be of help to soccer in that in any way? And you see a lot of horizons for heart rate monitors, aqua running, things that we're doing. That's one. And second, drugs. What do you see going on both on the world stage and in ours to fight the role of drugs in soccer and also in the world game?
Well, I don't have much. Second question. I don't have much experience with drugs being used in soccer. My Dutch friend here, the Dutch were very well known for Nanderon, what was it called? They were caught with performance enhancing drugs. That's the only experience that I've seen. Not to be critical, but it was a lot of Dutch players, especially the ones that played in Italy. Well, I don't see a lot of that there. Performance, there's other drugs that athletes use, but they're not performance enhancing. The sports science today is over the top. I mean, it's to a fault that every step these guys take, it's like measured today. And at the end of the day, I haven't seen great progress because of it. One of the things we did after we played Panama, we beat Panama 4-0 Friday night in Orlando. Will we recover to play Tuesday in Trinidad? Right? I have sports scientists, sports psychologists, doctors, trainers. Everyone writes, check them all off. They're all fine. They're all ready to go. All our testing, all our measurements, you can go with all these guys. And it tells me at the end that maybe that's great that they test right, but mentally, maybe they're not strong enough mentally to deal with a little bit of fatigue. The team that beat us that day, they all played Friday in Mexico. So it's not like they had a fresher team. So you don't know with that stuff. It's really hard. You see I find it interesting when I watch in basketball today, they're talking about they play 6-minute shifts, these guys, the greatest athletes in the world. And you ask them, what do you think of this? I could play the whole game. LeBron James played 48 minutes in playoff games this year. So I don't know what the sports science is telling us yet. We have everything in the world. My best sports science is that LA Galaxy games at the end, the next day I'd get all this information on how much guys ran, the number of sprints, this and that. This is a problem. That's good, blah, blah, blah. This guy's the lowest guy every game. This one guy is the lowest guy every game for us. What do I do with him? It was Robbie Keane. Said, well, you can take that paper you have there. I could care less how far Robbie's running. He's scoring goals and winning games for us. So, there's a lot of, it's not as easy as you think. Yeah. Robbie Keane, by far, every game was the lowest in his metrics. Yeah, the best player most of the games too. Yeah. So you gotta look at that stuff. And a lot of the sports science people today, young guys, energetic guys, they don't have enough experience. They will always measure. They'll use the metrics as a means of making an assessment on a player. So it gets a little confusing. You need to have enough experience to kind of read between the lines at times.
With your direct perspective, what do you think the impact of Beckham's MLS time was, and what do you hope comes with Rooney's 3 or 4 years here?
Well, I wouldn't. Well, first, Beckham had a great impact. Beckham came in time in the league, and I think his first year with the Galaxy was 2007. Yeah, and he made a great impact locally and for the league. And the biggest thing he did is he drew attention around the world for the sport in the United States. And then on top of that, he was a good player and won championships. And now he's going to be an owner. And I think he gave a lot of credibility to the league. I don't think Rooney's going to be the same. No one's the same as David Beckham. We do postseason tours, and I used to say that there's 5 most popular people in the world: the Pope, President of the United States, David Beckham, and can you name any others? And we go into countries, and it was unbelievable. We got off a plane in Sydney, Australia. There was a billboard of Beckham. It was like the length of a football field. It's crazy everywhere we went, and he was unique. Now Rooney's is a real good one, but I don't think he's David Beckham in terms of that. But he should be a very good player for DC United.
Thanks a lot, Coach. Looking at the World Cup, France has about 50 players in the World Cup. Not just playing for France, but playing for Morocco, playing for Senegal, Tunisia. They produced 50 players in this World Cup. How can we use their blueprint to look at our immigrant community or people from lower socioeconomic groups to really cultivate that talent that exists, not just players, but also coaches too?
Wow, that's a tough one. There are French-born players that are playing for Morocco. Yeah. You know, as I've said this a number of times, we're unique. We're different. So in France, they're not competing against all these other sports, have all these other challenges, the size, all the other things. There's no reason to believe that this sport can't blossom in this country over the next 20 years. I don't know the answer to the question. I mean, if I did, I would have been in Russia today. I wouldn't be here with you people. I'd actually prefer to be in Russia, but don't take that personally. I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, we have this enormous country with great resources, and we still haven't really been able to get it all right in our sport. But I think we're making a lot of progress. But I don't know how to really answer that.
You mentioned learning from other coaches about tactics and other things in other sports. Is there anyone that stands out in particular from another sport, either here in the U.S. or somewhere else in the world, that you've learned a lot from?
Well, I've traveled the world and have met some of the top coaches and watched training and all of that, and there's really no surprises. But one thing that influenced me when I was young, and this will go back to a book I had read in the 70s and had different chapters, and I remember reading one of the Dutch coaches came over to the United States and watched college basketball and was influenced by high pressure, pressing. And that's an example of where you use other sports. The similarities between basketball and soccer, believe it or not, are fairly close. And it just at the time, it kept my eyes open to look at other sports and see how I can utilize some of those tactics in the sport of soccer. But at the time, I was very influenced by that article because it talked about pressing, and I thought that was something was natural for American athletes, and I always try to use in my teams. But when you go around the world, everything's a little bit different. But at the end of the day, it's not that much different. So I've been in training sessions in the top clubs in the world with the top national teams in the world. I told a story the other day, and I'll try not to keep you too long here. I went to a Brazil training session in Miami about 4 years ago, and I could be wrong. Could have been, no, it's probably 7 years ago. And Phil Scolari was the coach of Brazil at the time. My son was coaching at FIU in Miami, and Brazil was training there. So Brazil had a Wednesday friendly in Miami against, I think it was Ecuador. So they're most of the players for Brazil are playing in the top clubs in the world. So they come over, flying to Miami, guys in Barcelona, Real Madrid, the top players. They show up, there's 20 outstanding players. I'm at training, and I'm saying this will be interesting to watch what they do. They have a center circle. They had 22 players. They played 20 against 2 guys in the middle. And you got to touch the ball to get out. So that was the warm-up. And then they did a 10-minute passing exercise. And then they played 11 against 11 for 70 minutes straight. And you walk around away from that and you say, what did I learn today? But I thought it was interesting. And then and it started where the second team was beating the first team pretty good. And that second team is pretty good players. At the time, I think Marcelo was on the second team that day. And just watching it. And at the end of the day, you say we got good players, and we're just going to let them play, and it was interesting. So when you go around, you always see these things. You go to different environments. It's obviously more coach-driven, but there's all different ideas. That's what it always tells me at the end of the day.
And we have time for one more question.
Hi, my question is, how crucial do you think professional playing experience is to management or coaching at the top level?
You could use Zidane as an example and say it's very important. You could use Mourinho and say it's not, or Benitez, or Arsene Wenger, because those guys didn't have. So coaching is teaching, and you have to be able to teach, and playing doesn't bring that to you. The best players I've ever had, I'd be scared to see them coaching. So, I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's a different skill. It's that simple. LeBron James is not going to be coaching basketball when he's done.
All right, guys. Well, that's all the time we have for tonight.
Thank you for coming out. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you all so much.